just pray with me as we open up. Lord, I just ask you to humbly bless just the hearing of your word today, Father God. Let it move and let that wisdom be heard. Amen. Ooh! Look at all the colors. So shiny. Mmm. Is that cherry? Melody poured out the bowl of delicious magic beans before she left on her sales appointments. Melody and I, we shared an office. She was my administrative assistant. Actually, she was my secretary. But this was back in the day when you still called her that. And I mean, it really was her title. And now the longer she was gone that day, the more I stared at those jelly beans. The longer her chair was empty, the more my mouth began to water. Right? You know, getting on the keyboard. And I begin this inner dialogue with myself, right? You know, I'm there like, well, gosh, those sure look good. And, you know, I mean, I'm sure she wouldn't mind if I just had one, right? I mean, one or two. I mean, I'm her boss. I'm sure it'd be okay. I mean, she almost put them out there for me. I mean, look. I mean, they're in a bowl. I mean, she wouldn't put them in a bowl on her desk if she didn't want to share them, right? They'd be like in the back of her drawer somewhere. So I'm sure she means for me to eat them. It's obvious. But I'll just wait for her to get back, though. Well, maybe I'll have just one. She won't even notice. I mean, did she count them? You know. Oh, these kilos. Where's that cherry at? There we go. Oh, that's so good. I'll be sure and thank her when she gets back. Be sure and thank her. Oh, is that great? Is that lemon? Is that orange? No. Melody returned to the office to find a bowl of mostly black licorice jelly beans and a few greens, because I'm not real fond of those green ones. And she came in and she said, oh my gosh. She said, what happened to my jelly beans? They were for a sales meeting. And then she looked at me and I cowered inwardly. Did you eat all my jelly beans? Technically, no, I thought, because there's still some left. And she said, did you? No, I said. I was in accounting for a bit, which was true. Are you sure? She pressed. I smiled, With her hand on her hip, she said, I know you're lying to me. And I said, you do? She says, yeah, because you got jelly bean in your teeth. Oh, it's like, right? Wiping with a sponge. Now, I did apologize profusely, right? She wasn't mad. In fact, we laughed a lot about it. And I did buy replacement candy for the meeting, which I guess you could call repentance candy. But surely there is a lesson to be learned here. Now, you're probably wondering why in the world I have a sponge here, right? Sponge got to do with jelly beans. But you're probably wondering why it's here, but I wanted to really illustrate and help us understand how we go from just looking at the jelly beans to licking our lips to gobbling them up and then lying and covering it up. How do we get there in hindsight so seemingly easily? You see, the Bible tells us we were brought forth into this world in iniquity, with this sinful nature that's planted in us. Now, none of us look at a baby and go, woo, look at all that sin in there. You know? But as we all know, we grow up, right? Babies grow up. Babies grow up in a world of flesh and all kinds of things. You see, the Word says, there is not a righteous person who, even in doing good things, does not sin. For we have all sinned, screwed up, and fell short of the glory of God. Every single one of us. You see, this sponge is like that sinful nature we have. We think, well, it's not a big sin, right? You know, jelly beans or whatever. I'll just dip my toe in the serpenty waters. I won't jump all the way in. I mean, I'm Christian, duh. But the problem is, we are a sponge. We are a sponge. We think, oh, I'm just going to soak up a drop. Just a drop. But you can't dip a sponge in water and just soak up a drop. You can't. It just keeps going and going and going and going. Right? Just drops. There's a mess. You have to clean up. But first you're eating one jelly bean. Next thing you know, you're rifling through her desk, digging through her purse, looking for gum, saying, oh, it wasn't me. And I know you understand this, right? I know you understand this. Once you give yourself permission, right? When you talk yourself into just allowing or doing one little thing, it gets easy to do. And sometimes it's that feeling that you have to, right? In order to cover up all the other stuff lest you be exposed. What jelly beans? Next thing you know, your sponge is soaking wet. And the floodgates, they get opened. And it's kind of like when you're on a diet, right? It's like, well, I already ate the cookie. I might as well eat the muffin. A la mode. If you've ever had an addiction, you get this. I'm just going to have one drink. Hello? You get this. Now, I know you can see when people in your life, when they have stuff happening, people that you love dearly, when you see that begin to happen to them and people that are close to you, you see these little choices that they are making or about to make, which will lead to this potentially disastrous place for them. And you get stuck in that place where you think, okay, do I say something? Do I just let them make their own choices? I mean, I know I'm supposed to be supportive, they count on me, but I don't know, maybe it's not my business. You see, the reason we don't say anything to the people we love is because we fear that it may not be well received and cause some strife in the relationship, and so silent we become. And then we watch the train go by on two wheels around the curve, watching that happen. Other times it's you. You be driving that train sometimes, right? You drive that train, and I know you've had times in your life where one bad choice caused a chain reaction of events, sending you into the spiral of lostness and confusion and chaos. And I know you remember how quickly it went off track. And once that happens, it's real hard to clean up. In fact, some of you still may be trying to clean it up today. What about now? What places in your life can you not stop eating the jelly beans? Where have little choices began to go off track for you? You know, maybe you shouldn't have took that call, sent that email, maybe from your ex, friend you're angry at. Maybe lunch was a bad idea with so-and-so. Maybe you shouldn't have said or done that at school, or at work, or to your friend, maybe a club you're in at school, to your family. Maybe you should have told that little white lie. Maybe all that gossip was a bad idea because now there's all these questions. And as my mom always says, my, what a tangled web we weave. See, once you start pulling on the thread, right, it all starts to unravel at the seams. Our sponges become a wet-sopping mess. A wet-sopping mess. So how do we protect ourselves? How do we keep it dry? How do we stay on course? And how do we course correct when we need to? Let's see what the Word has to teach us today. I'm sure there's a passage on jelly beans in there somewhere. Just cause. So last week, Pastor Allie spoke of Joshua telling the people in the Promised Land, I don't know about you, but for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And the Israelites actually answered. They say, oh, us too. Us too. Never will we forsake God's commandments. We will serve him. The answer. Never will we turn away. We'll see. You see, after Joshua dies, the people start grumbling. Well, Moses, Joshua, they start to grumble. They want a king. Everyone else had one, and so they chose Saul, which God predicted would be an absolute disaster, and it was. So God says, okay, I see what's going on. I'm going to choose my own king now. I'm going to choose my king. And he chose a little shepherd boy named David. He slayed a giant, threw some rocks, he gained some favor. He was proclaimed king, King David now. And as a king, he brings together the whole country, all the tribes, the lands he brought together into one unified country. Oh, David, he dances with joy before God and the Ark of the Covenant till his clothes came off. He's called a man after God's own heart. And he wins many victories in God's name. David was the man. David was the man. So much so that he began to stay in the palace, to lead from there, and have the people doing battle. But see, he didn't do this alone. So the Bible tells us that he had 37 very trusted warriors, like officers who'd go out and lead the troops in different areas. And they are officers that he depended on, leading these battles. One of those, Uriah, was a loyal warrior, servant, and friend to David. And we know how important Uriah is because of where he lived in proximity to the palace. He was right next door to the palace. You just don't get to live right next door to the king, to the palace no less, unless you're very important to him. So one night, while all the army's out fighting battles, David goes to the roof for some fresh air. And lo and behold, what does he see? Uriah's bowl of jelly beans. It's his wife, Bathsheba. She's up there. She's bathing. She's just bathing on the roof. Bathing on the roof next door. And wow, she was so beautiful. Now David, in this moment, and it's a moment that we can all relate to, where we know there's a difference between looking and gazing. You see, when he first saw her, he had this opportunity to say, wow, she's a vision. But it'd be improper to stare. I better get to bed. I better get to bed. Alas, David did not. What's the harm? I'm just looking at the jelly beans. And the longer he looked, the more his heart grew with this insatiable longing. Maybe I'll just talk to her a little bit. Maybe she's, Uriah's gone. Maybe I'll just check in with her. Maybe I'll just send her a gift of like figs and some bread. Yeah, that would be kind. Yeah. King David sends for her. He sends for her to come to the palace. Surprised, she thought, what can I do? What woman or man can tell a king no? So escorted by David's men, Uriah's wife comes, and the jelly beans, they looked even more delicious up close. You see, David could not resist. Being wrapped in authority, power, and privilege, Bathsheba had no choice in this matter. For she was a woman. A married woman. But for who can tell a king no? Who? See, she becomes pregnant, and David begins to pull on that thread, his sponge more than damp now. He sends for her husband Uriah to come home from war. Maybe it was to confess, right? Maybe it was to say, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I wanted to see you in person. I really wanted to make amends with you. I wanted to offer you my humble remorse. And Uriah arrives, and David says, hey, how's that war going? How's the soldiers? Okay, good. You've been working so hard. You know, Uriah. Oh, here's some wine. Have some wine. Why don't you go home to your wife and have some jelly beans? Be intimate with her. It'll be good for you. Here, have some more wine. David missed a chance to change course. He missed that chance, and in the web, it got tangled so much more. Uriah, this is, we often forget about Uriah when it comes to story. Uriah, being the noble, honest, and loyal man that he is, he refuses. He says, what? How can I do that when I know that my men are out on the field fighting a war? How can I do that? And when my God is out there in a tent with them, the ark, I will not do this. David says, all right, I'll send you back. I'll send you back to war. You see, sometimes when we're around people, you know what I mean, and that who mention God, who talk to us about God in their lives, or when they mention that they're trying to make a decision but waiting to see what prayer lets them know, it kind of snaps you into this place where you're like, oh, okay, yes, you know what I mean? And it calls you to this place where you do the same. You recognize that you need that too. And now, if Uriah's righteous response wasn't a wake-up call, I don't know what could be in this story for him. I mean, it was just this other opportunity that David missed for redemption. He missed it, and he didn't take it. He sends Uriah, he says, back to war, on the front lines with specifications that the army abandon him, with specific instructions to make sure that he died. Bathsheba, still teary-eyed, in black, is forced to marry the man who forced himself on her and who murdered her husband. David's sponge sucked up every drop in the face of the 10 Commandments that he so joyfully danced before. A man after God's own heart. A shepherd that could not shepherd himself. He could not shepherd himself. What I want you to see in this story is how quickly it went off track for David, right? How quickly it went off track. How one jelly bean turned into hiding the bowl and then the body. How just looking spiraled somehow into murder. I also want you to see the chances that David had to stop, make things right, to hear that inner dialogue and that he just didn't do. If only someone had pulled him aside during those moments for a reality check, how might things be different? But for who rebukes the king? Who tells the king no? You see, the Lord sends the prophet Nathan to do exactly that. Can you imagine how Nathan felt having to go and do this? Having to go and tell David, you got a jelly bean in your teeth. I mean, he works for the king. He just saw him murder one of his closest friends and allies. Sometimes we are called to do the hardest of things. Nathan, he nervously goes. I bet he took his time walking up to the steps. Stood outside a little bit. And then he tells David this little story. He says, there was 2 men, David. One was really rich and one was poor. The rich man, he had thousands and thousands of sheep and cattle. And the poor man, he didn't have anything. He had one little lamb that he loved, that he bought, saved up for to buy for him and his children. And he raised it like a daughter, this poor man. He shared food, drank from the same cup, and he even slept in his arms at night. One day, a traveler comes to the rich man. But the rich man, in the name of hospitality, did not take one of his thousands to feed the traveler, but rather he took and slaughtered the sweet little lamb of the poor man. Nathan pauses. He draws silence, hoping the arrow of the Lord hits its mark. David begins to yell. He burns with anger, it says. Against Nathan? No, against the man who stole the lamb. And it says, he says, in the name of God, this man must die. This man must die. He must pay for what he's done. I have no pity on this man. Tell me. Tell me. Who is this man? Nathan pulls back his bow and fires. My king, you are that man. Sometimes we need to be told that we are that man. You see, it's so easy for us to get off track because, like David, we're not always real good at shepherding ourselves. We all need a Nathan in our lives, the people who will be honest with us when we are out of line. Friends who know us well enough to see when we are making a mistake. And mentors that are not afraid to put things in perspective when we need it most. But here's the thing. It will only work when you are humble enough to set aside your ego and give it ear. Now, it doesn't mean that you always have to follow it. It doesn't mean that. But when your Nathan comes to you, you listen. You listen gratefully. And then you take it to the Lord in private, in prayer, and test it. Test it against the Word, as it calls us to do, to see what God wants you to do. It's hard to be a Nathan. I tell you as a pastor, it's hard to be a Nathan. It's hard for you to be a Nathan. But when we see the people we love kind of starting to veer off track, God calls us to be friends and loved ones we consider ourselves and are trusted to be. You see, we often remain silent because we want to be supportive, right? But encouraging someone you love to make good decisions in the Lord is being supportive. That's what we must understand. And I would even take it a step further and say, don't wait for your Nathan to come to you. Don't wait till he gets so bad that he comes. Don't wait until he gets the courage to come, because sometimes by then, woo, the bowl of jelly beans is empty. But go, ask your Nathan, check in with him. Hey, I want to run this by you. I want you to know what this message is not. What this message is not is an old church call to a harsh, public, stern rebuking. That is not what this is a call to do. Nathan spoke to David in private. He spoke to him in private. He spoke to him craftily and in the manner in which Galatians and Ephesians describe. That as brothers and sisters, if someone is caught up in this self-snare, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. And that you should be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of love. You do it prayerfully. You do it gently. You do it kindly with the utmost greatest of humility, which is important because when you are humble, you're able to lower the chance that there's going to be strife or not received well because they see your genuine humility. Now, what I want you to know, if you have any malice or any other agenda in your heart, if you're angry with this person, if you're envious of this person, if you're having difficulty with this person, then stay at home. Don't do it. Don't do it because it will be skewed and it will not be honest and it will not be pure. Nor will it come across as humble. It'll be accusatory. It's not what you need. Jesus says that wrongdoing begins in the heart. which is why we put on that full armor, right? That full armor. And Proverbs says, above all else, guard your hearts, because everything in your life flows from there. Flows from there. What I want you to know is this. This is not a storytelling of adultery or a moral scolding directed at those who commit sins. That's not what this is. But it is a model for genuine movement towards repentance and forgiveness in and through God. That's what this story is about. You see, David could have said, forget you, Nathan. Get out of my palace. You're going to the front lines. See you next week. He could have done that, but he didn't. He listened and acknowledged where he was wrong to God. Lord, I've done evil in your eyes. There he is, great King David, the humble shepherd, warrior, and musician, and poet, and liar, and cheater, and possibly rapist and murderer. And yet there he is, great King David, humbly confessing to the Lord. Perhaps he's a man after God's own heart after all. You see, we want the good guys and the bad guys, like in the movies, to be plainly separate in our lives. But it's just not that way, right? It's just not that way. We all have wet sponges. Every one of us. And like King David, we do both good and evil things. If someone has done something to hurt you, maybe you're having friction with, in the Spirit of the Lord, I say to you today, don't necessarily count them out. Because of one thing, or because of a difficult situation, because even you get jelly bean in your teeth. And I know you're tired of feeling friction and the stress from that situation. Remember the call to love and forgive. Remember that. If you feel like you've made a mess of your life, gosh, I can't even tell you how many times I've made a mess and more mess, and I've cleaned it up so many different times. But if you feel like you've done that in the past, or even right now, I want you to know that you are not a bad person. You are not. If that were true, I would be. Because I guarantee you, through the drugs and the good times, it was a mess. I want you to know that God has not counted you out. God has not counted you out, for you have been cleansed, and you can be cleaned again and again, washed in the blood of the Lamb. Let it go. God already has. God already has. Hear the words of David, written by David in today's psalm, and let them ring true for you. The Lord cleanses you with hyssop, and you are clean. He washes you, and you are whiter than snow. That's the promise of Christ, that it doesn't matter how much your sponge soaks up, that through His mercy and that through His grace, He will wring it out every time. That's the promise. Amen.
Amen.